Father, I just want to lift up our time together again. I thank you for the privilege of getting to spend our lunches together, if you will. But I just ask that you would uh, allow us to be uh, teachable and apply what we're hearing in our lives with the help of your Holy Spirit. I think I'm thinking of John 15, that when Jesus says that abide in me, for apart from me, you can do nothing. I want to see the kind of change happen in all of our lives where we can only credit you for doing it. And I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a review because I was thinking through what we've covered so far, and I really believe that repetition is probably more helpful than not. And just so I have in your notes, like review of weeks 1 through 4, because these things are building on each other a bit. So week 1, let me share the screen. Week 1, I just introduced this whole concept of relational wisdom, and we talked about the wheel, that a relationally wise person has a functional and a strong relationship with God, with others, and with themselves. And within every one of those relationships, there's a component of awareness and the ability to engage well. So self-awareness though was week 2, because a lot of people really make no progress in relational wisdom because they don't know themselves. And in week 2, we talked about self-awareness in the heart. Jeremiah 17:9 is a passage that is really popular at Soul Care. It says that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? And the answer to that is no one can understand it. Our hearts lie to us, and our hearts are the functional center of who we are. It's what we make decisions from the heart. We value things from the heart. What we love comes from the heart. Also, what we believe, how we interpret things. Our heart is much more than just a feeling. It's much more than a thinking instrument. It's the core of who we are. And I think Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. That everything that comes out of us flows from the heart. And then in order to know our hearts, we have to recognize that what comes out of us is coming from our hearts. The things that we say reveals our hearts, the decisions we make. So we reviewed, like, week 2, a situation happens. I yell at my kids. No, a situation happens. My kids disobey or whatever, and maybe they get up early in the morning. I didn't yell at my kids this morning, but my kids got up before they were allowed to this morning, and I was trying to get some work done. So I was frustrated. Let's say I yelled at my kids. I didn't, because I'm a good person. But in my responses, I yell at them. Well, I could blame it on my kids, or I could just say I'm in a bad mood. But the truth is, if I had yelled at my kids this morning, I can imagine that happened. What I would have been thinking this morning was, you kids are not only disobeying, but you are making it impossible for me to get my job done. I've got so much to do. You're standing in the way of me doing my job well. And at the heart of that would be, I have to succeed at work. So if I were to have yelled at my kids this morning for getting up early, it wouldn't have been because they're disobeying the Lord. It's because they are standing in the way of what I really value, which is being prepared for this. Frankly, I was working on this morning. Okay, so that's a quick run-by example of something that didn't happen, but has happened before in the past, I'm sure, and probably might happen again. So then we talked about, and by the way, Luke 6 talks about what comes out of the man, comes out of him because it was in him. Then we talked about, and this is week 2, I introduced the 3 trees. And without going through the whole thing, it presents a way to reframe a lot of our lives, that there are situations that lands on all of us, that everybody is sometimes living life in the desert, and life gets hot, things get difficult, and it comes at us, and we respond sometimes to our situations in a very thorny way, where we hurt others with our sin, for in the name of self-protection, or Jeremiah 17 introduces us to the person who bears fruit and doesn't even fear a year of drought. And the thing that makes these two people different is this man is trusting in man while this person is trusting in the Lord. That at the heart of these two people, there's a very different functional center in their lives. A person who's trusting in man is anybody who's not trusting in the Lord. If the Lord's not getting you out of bed, if he's not the one you're serving, if he's not the one you're seeking to please, you're seeking to please man. You're serving some other agenda. And there's no third option. It's either you're serving the Lord or you're serving man. When you are serving man or you're trusting in man, you are going to look thorny in some variation. And when that happens, we have the opportunity to not just confess the sin that's coming out of us, my impatience, my yelling, it's what I'm actually serving, and I confess that to the Lord who forgives it. And I get to trust the Lord for my provision, for my glory, for my whatever it might be. And when I'm trusting in him, I bear fruit because serving him bears different fruit. And we respond to sometimes the same situations. Our kids getting up early and making getting work done impossible. I can respond to that with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, etc. And so to tie that back to relational wisdom is the way we relate to others sometimes kicks things off, and we have to come to a place of self-awareness, understanding, why am I procrastinating right now? Why am I getting so irritated with the situation? Why do I feel hopeless? And we see what's at the heart, and we take it to the Lord, and our relationship with the Lord needs to be strong enough to know that, am I going to meet a God whose arms are folded, who doesn't want to hear from me? Or do I have a God who's my Father, who knows me and who loves me and who's forgiven me? And so God awareness allows us to engage him. And when we engage him, he changes what comes out of us. We engage ourselves and we engage others in a way that's productive and healthy. So far I'm reviewing a lot. We've already talked about these things. I'm tempted to stop and ask for questions, but we won't get through it all. But if you want more, that's week 2. Next, oh, I didn't know all that was there. Sorry. Next is week 3. We talked about SOG awareness, which is just being aware, learning to be aware of what's going on in me, what's going on with others, and what's God up to. And sometimes stopping and just taking a 360-degree look or investigation, just by asking some simple questions, can get us out of the gutter, out of the ditch, or whatever. And then on to last week. Might have been our deepest week, honestly. We talked about emotions and how emotions often make engaging others impossible. Emotions can hijack what's going on and make a mess of the best intentions. And so we defined emotions are physical sensations we feel that arise out of thoughts and beliefs that come from circumstances. So there's emotions flow out of things that we love, essentially, and they move us to action. That's just by way of review. God gave us emotions to connect us relationally, to move us to action, and they also reveal what we love. So I have some examples here. I did this last week, but I've changed it up. If I'm happy, is that a healthy emotion? You probably know it's a trick question, but if I'm flirting, or not if I'm flirting with another man, but if this woman is flirting with another man, that's not a good happiness. I mean, she's thinking this is just some harmless fun. Okay, well, great, she's happy. That's not a healthy emotion for that circumstance, and that happiness might move her to action in a way that, if that leads her to get dressed up tomorrow, well, that's something bad's going on, right? So if you take a negative emotion like jealousy, it seems like a negative or unhealthy emotion. But if this guy realizes my wife is flirting with another man, jealousy, she's supposed to be flirting with me, jealousy is perfectly appropriate. You should feel jealous. There's a problem if you're not jealous in that scenario. God's described as a jealous God. He's jealous for our affection and our devotion. And then, but if that jealousy moves this man to, I'm going to go flirt with his wife, not a that now the unhealth is not from where where the emotion's coming from, but how the emotion is moving us. So with all of those things, and put it together, the application was to learn to read your emotions. And that this acronym, here were the points, put them all up. To stop and learn to recognize, what am I feeling, which right there gets us sometimes out of the reaction process of just blindly moving forward with our emotions. Our emotions often feel trustworthy and authoritative. But to recognize what am I feeling is forcing me to think and then evaluate, why am I feeling this way? So it starts to unmask the content of the emotion. Am I angry for the right for valid reasons? Or um, and then anticipating, where is this leading me? Where is this moving me? And when you're thinking through and you're doing if you've done these three questions, you're not as emotionally drunk as you would be had you just run with the emotion. It moves you whether you think or not. But to stop and slow down and think it through is actually very biblical. You know that the biblical prescription for anger over and over is to be slow to anger. Proverbs 16:33 or 32, I can't remember, but it says, um, uh, he who is wise is slow to anger. I used to have this one memorized. But a man who can control his spirit is stronger than the one who can take a city. It's the idea of, like, it's one thing to be angry. It's another thing to know how to restrain and slow down in your anger, because anger moves you to move right away and crush the opposition. So to think this through, you are seizing control, and you can probably be at a better place to say, how can I begin to regain control? What I don't like about this application, though, is it leaves God out of the equation. You could run this play and be practically an atheist, which the truth is your emotions are not truly addressed with that. Like, and the question, I touched on it last week, but how can I begin to heal my unhealthy emotions? And the answer to that is by learning to engage God with your emotions. That God gave us emotions to connect us. Like, emotions are meant to connect us. And so my joy or my wife's joy should be my joy. My wife's pain should be my pain. And I'm connecting with her and I'm joining her in that. But the problem is, there are some emotions that there's nobody that can really connect with me, because it's too strong. And when I take my strongest emotions to God, He alone is able to heal me. And so just to illustrate it this way, most of us do one of these two things. We either embrace our emotion and then and engage others. Meaning, if I'm angry, if I'm annoyed with you, I'm going to trust that I'm annoyed with you for a good reason, and I'm going to go confront you. I'm just going to embrace my anger and I'm going to charge forward. Does that go well? Never. I mean, I don't think it ever goes well. You come across as a porcupine charging, like you just. And then there's the other people who, I think Ken Sande says that there's peace breakers and then there's peace fakers. If you feel angry and you just suppress it because you don't like to fight, well, suppressing it, what does that do? It leads to bitterness. Ephesians 4:31 says, therefore let go of all bitterness and wrath and anger and slander, and clamor and slander, and put away all malice. Get rid of, and it lists all these different types of anger. Some of them are expressive, engaging angers, and some of them are suppressing angers that you push down. And the first one he says is bitterness. Bitterness is a type of anger that you've swallowed and it's gone subterranean. And you don't necessarily even know that it's there until a little thing annoys you and you get really disproportionately angry because you've been holding on to it, holding on to a resentment. Neither one of these types of reactions to our emotions are healthy. We're supposed to take our emotions and engage God with them, which was what the Psalms show us. And when we do that, we are possibly ready to engage others. But Brandy and I know this much. We know when we're starting to argue, we've had many arguments that go nowhere. We're just going back and forth. And we've come to this place where we realize that we need to spend time with God in the middle of it. Like, in order to continue productively in our argument, we need to separate and pray. And I'm going to be totally honest. There have been many times where I've separated and I've gone in my room and I prayed, bow my head, and I pray, and I think I've prayed, and then I go back out there and continue the argument. And all I've really done effectively is tap the brakes a little bit. Then I go back and I engage Brandy, and it's still ugly. Anybody else ever done that? Okay. Yeah. Of the few people I see a couple hands. Um, maybe you didn't do that, and I think there, if you didn't raise your hand, I'm assuming it's because you didn't try to engage God first. um, it just, I don't always come back from engaging God changed. Before I'm ready to engage others in high octane emotions when they're at play, I need to make sure that I've been properly engaged. And that's why I'm inserting into this. When I engage God, I have to engage myself first. This is where there's a relational wisdom aspect to this. I can never engage God and bypass myself and go engage others. If that's the case, then this verse has no meaning. Matthew 7. Why do you see the speck that's in your brother's eye, but you don't notice the log that's in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, hey, let me take the speck out of your eye when there's a log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's. All right. So if I'm ready to engage someone else, I have had to have gone through the process of taking a log out of my own eye. If I'm not in any kind of argument or any kind of relational tension, if there is not some sin or some issue that I'm actively having to really repent of and experience God's forgiveness in, there's probably still a log in my eye that I'm unaware of. So, what are the marks of truly engaging yourself in your emotion? And this is where we're jumping off into week 5 here. That was a long summary, but I think it's necessary. How do we engage ourselves here? Well, I would say that you engage yourself when you've come to see and know God. Knowing God is the prerequisite to truly knowing yourself and accurately engaging your emotions. So it's your first blank there. And we see this over and over. And what I'm sharing here could easily be a semester. So I'm running through a museum with you and pointing out some stuff that we could camp out on. And it's hard for me because I want to camp out on all these points. But if you look in your notes, John Calvin there's a really cool quote from John Calvin. And he says, man never attains to a true self-knowledge until he has previously contemplated the face of God and come down after such contemplation to look into himself. If you've encountered God, the next thing that's going to happen is you're going to see yourself. Some biblical examples. I think they're written in your notes. Isaiah chapter 6 is the first one that came to my mind. When Isaiah is in the temple and he sees God, God's glory fills the temple, and there's seraphim. That's where the song "Holy, Holy, Holy" comes from. They're singing "Holy, Holy, Holy is the Lord God Almighty," and the angels who are sinless are covering their eyes in the presence of a holy God. And then what is Isaiah, this prophet who writes this long, book? What does he say? He says, woe is me, I'm undone, I'm a man of unclean lips. I mean, he falls down thinking he's going to die because he just saw the Lord. And Isaiah, I believe, was probably a very holy guy. And yet, seeing God, he's struck. Peter, when he's fishing, and Jesus, Luke chapter 5, and Peter's in the boat, and Jesus gets in the boat with him, and he's been fishing all night, and Jesus says, well, throw your net on the other side. And Jesus said, we've been fishing all night. What's the point? And he said, well, but because you say so, and he does it, and then he catches so many fish they can't even drag him onto the boat. What does Peter do? He falls down in the boat and he says, away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. There's countless examples that when we are in the presence of God, the effect is, one, encountering him eradicates pride and self-righteousness. When I'm in an argument with Brandy and we separate and pray, I am ready to go back in there and finish the argument. Why? Because I haven't seen the Lord. I haven't stopped and actually looked at him. All I've done is I say, hey, check, check. Okay, I'm done, God. Let's get back to it. And I have not witnessed a log in my own eye, and the reason I haven't seen a log in my own eye is because I haven't seen anything of the Lord. When I'm in His presence, when I see Him, I the high estimation I have of myself, like I'm the good guy here. I quickly realize I've got all sorts of self righteousness attitudes. I've got pride. I'm quick to be satisfied with any form of righteousness I find in myself, especially in an argument. Like I restrained myself, therefore I'm good. I didn't raise my voice, therefore I'm good. You're the one who started it. I mean, I'm childish like that. I focus on what they did wrong and my best intentions. But when I see the Lord, I quickly realize, oh, wait a second, I'm condescending. I'm petty, I'm defensive. All these things become clear about myself when I get into the presence of the Lord. He humbles us. I cling to any evidence that suggests I'm not that bad. I compare myself to people who are worse than me, and then I feel good. I could go on and on. Encountering God eradicates pride and self-righteousness. And another blank, encountering God always changes our perspective and our interpretations about things. That verse up there, Psalm 73, such a beautiful, one of my favorite Psalms. I think it's Asaph or Korah. I can't remember. The guy who writes it, he's a worship leader, and he's just eaten up with self-pity because everybody else is so blessed except him. And he spends 12, 13 verses talking about how the wicked have it so great. They're healthy. They've got it all. They laugh at the days to come. And then he says, but as for me, like I'm, I've got nothing. And then after a while, he as a worship leader, he says something like, if I spoke what I thought, I'd ruin many people's view of you. So he keeps his mouth shut. And he says, but when I thought to understand this, it seems to me a wearisome task until I went into the sanctuary of God. Then I discerned their end. All of a sudden, when this psalmist goes into the sanctuary of God and sees God, he sees that the people he's envying are living in a dream, and they're going to wake up one day in a nightmare. They're going to wake up away from the presence of the Lord. And he realizes, right now I'm enduring some pain, but you have me this whole time. I know that he's talking about envying wicked people, but I heard a pastor say this once. If you're an unbeliever, enjoy this world because it's the closest to heaven you'll ever get. But if you're a believer, endure this world because it's the closest to hell you'll ever get. Wow. Talk about a perspective change that I sometimes, until I get into the presence of God, my perspective is it lead to self-pity or entitlement or whatever it might be. So I could spend all day on this stuff, but encountering God has this effect on us. And when I say encountering God, I want to kind of shift my language a little bit to say it's encountering the God who gives us the gospel. By saying the gospel, I put another quote on your notes. Tim Keller said, "The gospel is this, that we are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared believe. Yet at the very same time, we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. I'm simultaneously loved and I'm sinful. And I'm on both sides of that equation. The gospel brings me back to center. Because if I'm down on myself and I think, man, you would have given up on me by now. I can look at the gospel, I can look at the cross and see that because Jesus died for me, that's how much God loves me. He sent his son to die for me. I'm not written off. And on the other hand, if I'm proud of myself, I'm looking down my nose, I got to look at the cross and see that I'm such a sinner that Jesus had to come and die for me. And so asking yourself in different situations, this is like the most practical bit of advice I can give, honestly, for this whole section, is learn to ask yourself, what difference does it make that Jesus died for me to what I'm currently going through, or what I'm currently believing, or what I'm currently feeling? And you don't rush through a question like that. You meditate on a question like that. What difference does it make that Jesus died for me? That to my I don't know, to feeling sorry for myself right now, or to being so frustrated by this person's opinion of me, or whatever. You can name it. I can name, I'm making up these examples, obviously. And here's the gospel's effect on us. And just, these are listed in your notes, right? I should have should have someone printed in front of me. I'm sorry, but the gospel's effect on us is it does things like it replaces pride with humility. It replaces disdain with mercy. You look down your nose on someone versus you have compassion on them. The gospel replaces guilt and shame with forgiveness and righteousness. It replaces weakness with strength, despair with hope, apathy and boredom with mission and purpose, and on and on and on, honestly. Yeah, so I need to, for time's sake, to keep on moving. But the gospel and encountering God inevitably results, it changes us. What comes out of us are things like this, like love, joy, peace. I listed the fruit of the Spirit. Then I started adding humility, conviction, courage, confession, repentance, forgiveness. This is the kinds of stuff that comes out of us when we encounter God, and the same God who loves us so much that he'd send a son for us. So that's the turning point. I believe that this kind of encounter with God is what it looks like to get the log out of your own eye. And what I'm trying to do with this whole section is to say true self-engagement is not like working on emotions and summoning this willpower to change. It's taking my eyes off myself, placing them on Christ, asking, what does it mean that Jesus died for me in this particular situation, and letting it redefine what's going on at a heart level. And when you go back to that place, my throat's bugging me, sorry. I should wear a mask, but we're on the computer, so it doesn't really matter. I'm not sick. Anyways, yeah, when that changes my heart, everything from there, it changes. So I would say at that point, you're ready to engage others with your emotion when that kind of stuff has happened. Okay, so what does it look like then to turn in with a changed heart to begin to engage others in a way that is healthy? And I think a lot of times it would be tempting to just get straight to this part. But I mean, I just know from having like sometimes like difficult seasons in marriage or parenting, or different people that have friends who are difficult, I don't engage others well until I address myself. So how do we do this? Well, you don't do it this way. I don't know how well you can read this slide or this cartoon. There's a guy eating nachos, and she's blowing her nose, and it says, "Hey," he says, "Hey, do you want me to stop eating nachos while you cry?" Okay, that's it's not a good example of engaging others well in their emotions, right? Nothing more incongruent than weeping and nachos. All right, I just made myself chuckle with that one. So here, emotions help connect us with God. They allow us to see into our own hearts. Our emotions are the window that reveals our hearts, and then they are an opportunity to enter into the lives of others and connect with others, because you're not the only emotional person in the equation. You might be arguing with another person who's emotional, and that emotion coming out of them is a window into their heart. Make sense? Like, but I mean, if I have a log in my eye, I can't go in there and do work on their heart. So so the log's been addressed. And what would that look like? Well, here's a great verse that just gives us a sampling of what it might look like. Romans 1 through 11 talks all about what Christ has done for us and what it means to believe the gospel and all this stuff. Well, as he's then playing out in Romans 12, therefore, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. And he goes on and talks about like living the Christian life. And he says, so you ought to love one another sincerely. Let love be genuine. Hate what's evil. Hold fast to what's good. And he gives all these different commands. I'm, bolding the ones that I want to say. That verse 15, he says, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. And these commands show like what it's looked like to be engaging others in a Christ-like way. And when he says things like, I could genuinely love someone, All right, well, how do you do that if you don't? If you're not feeling it, how do you genuinely love someone? How do you hate what's evil versus selfishly hating someone standing in your way? And then how do you, when it says rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep, I see those as bookend emotions. Like rejoicing is one extreme, weeping is another extreme. I would think that includes everything in between, all the different emotions. So how do you enter into another person's world, love them and meet them there? And I would say there's a big difference between knowing what a person's experiencing and entering into that just not with knowledge. Like, I understand you. That's one thing, but actually rejoicing and actually weeping with people. Um, this is one of the fundamental characteristics of genuine love. And tying these two together. I mean, it's genuine love to bless someone who persecutes you. That's genuine love. But rejoicing with someone, engaging them in their emotions, is an aspect of genuine love. I've got a clip to play for you. It's from the movie Good Will Hunting. And if you haven't seen it, Matt Damon's character is Will Hunting, Good Will Hunting. His name is Will Hunting. He's a hardened orphan from like the south side of Boston. He's a math genius, and just a tough kid. He's a hardened orphan. He gets in trouble and he's assigned to a therapist played by Robin Williams. I think the therapist's name is Sean. So in their first session together, the session is a disaster, absolute disaster. Will, the kid, deconstructs everything in Sean's office, including this painting. Like, he walks around, and I'm not going to play this part, but he walks around this counselor's office and talking about the books in there and saying, "Oh, you must have gone to this school." And then he's just kind of tearing them apart gently. Then he gets to this painting and he starts critiquing the painting. And in that critique, Will's deconstructing everything about the painting and about the bad technique. And then he says something about, like, hey, he in critiquing the painting, Sean pins Will to the wall, gets really angry, and he finds out it was his wife made the painting, and he says, "Don't you ever say anything about my wife." And so here the counselor is physically pinning his counselee to the wall, and Will got under his skin. So Will's a genius. He unravels his counselor in the first 5 minutes of their first session. If you're a counselor, you don't expect a second session when that happens in your first session. So what this clip is it's the second session that they have together. And so I want you to listen for how the counselor, Sean, how does he enter in to Will Hunting's world, emotionally speaking.
So what's this? Real tasty choice moment between guys?
This is really nice. You got a thing for swans? Is this like a fetish? It's something like, maybe we need to devote some time to...
Thought about what you said to me the other day about my painting. Stayed up half the night thinking about it. Something occurred to me. I fell into a deep, peaceful sleep and haven't thought about you since. Do you know what occurred to me?
No.
You're just a kid. You don't have the faintest idea what you're talking about.
Why, thank you.
It's all right. You've never been out of Boston.
Oh.
If I asked you about art, you'd probably give me the skinny on every art book ever written. Michelangelo. Know a lot about him. Life's work, political aspirations, him and the Pope, sexual orientation, the whole works, right? But you can't tell me what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel. You never actually stood there and looked up at that beautiful ceiling. Seen that. If I ask you about women, you'd probably give me a syllabus of your personal favorites. You may have even been laid a few times. can't tell me what it feels like to wake up next to a woman and feel truly happy. You're a tough kid. I ask you about war, you probably throw Shakespeare at me, right? Once more into the breach, dear friends. But you've never been near one. You've never held your best friend's head in your lap and watch him gasp his last breath looking to you for help. I ask you about love, you probably quote me a sonnet. But you've never looked at a woman and been totally vulnerable. Known someone that could level you with her eyes. Feel my God put an angel on earth just for you. Who could rescue you from the depths of hell. And you wouldn't know what it's like to be her angel. To have that love for her, be there forever. Through anything. Through cancer. And you wouldn't know about sleeping sitting up in a hospital room for 2 months holding her hand because the doctors could see in your eyes that the terms visiting hours don't apply to you. You don't know about real loss because that only occurs when you love something more than you love yourself. I doubt you've ever dared to love anybody that much. I look at you, I don't see an intelligent, confident man. I see a cocky, scared kid. But you're a genius, Will. No one denies that. No one could possibly understand the depths of you. But you presume to know everything about me because you saw a painting of mine. You ripped my f***ing life apart. You're an orphan, right? Do you think I'd know the first thing about how hard your life has been? How you feel? Who you are? Because I read Oliver Twist. Does that encapsulate you? Personally, I don't give a shit about all that because you know what? I can't learn anything from you. I can't read in some book. Unless you want to talk about you, who you are. And I'm fascinated. I'm in. But you don't want to do that, do you, sport? You're terrified of what you might say. Your move, Chief.
Pretty powerful. Let me just ask you guys, what did you? The contrast I want to make here is that Will had picked out a bunch of facts about Sean, and he gets him, and then Sean, the counselor, he doesn't do the same to Will. He captures the fundamental difference between like knowing about him versus like experiencing like versus knowing him. And what are some things? What are some ways he manages to enter in and engage this hardened kid? It's fine if you guys don't have anything, but it's
He played to his strength, which is wisdom or intelligence.
mm-hmm.
He complimented him. He said, you would, if you said this, he was vulnerable and said how you would have cornered or determined some type of fact about himself. In the same way, in intelligence, he reversed that and showed the humanity that he did not know.
Yeah. I mean, this is varsity level. By the way, Anna pointed out something at the very beginning. Anna Baker, like that he was vulnerable. He came in. He started off, and he kind of showed his credentials intellectually a bit. But then he smoothly moves into this place where he's vulnerable about his own pain. That Will touched a nerve, and for a good reason. He lost his wife to cancer, and this angel in his life, and so he opens up and gets vulnerable through the side door, but he goes there, and then he flips the script and says, you know, do you think I know everything about you as an orphan? You're an orphan, right? And he said, yeah. Do you think I know everything about you because I read Oliver Twist? It's just, and then he invites him to share it. He goes, I'm fascinated, but the ball's in your court at this point. But this is, I'm honestly, I don't expect any of us to be able to do it like this. And I'm sure Robin Williams, wouldn't have either. Someone wrote a script, but this is a beautiful demonstration of engaging someone else where emotions might be high, or they're not a form of connection, but they're really starting to become a source of disconnection. So I want to just offer some principles. The backside of your notes are probably sparse in comparison, but I'm offering some broad stroke principles that we will revisit more next week. But on how you begin to enter into someone's world, begin to enter in and know them. And so the first one, blank, is enter in. That's might sound redundant with the question, but it's inviting them to share with you what it's like for them to be them. Sounds simple enough, but it's not. Especially again, like when you've got history and tension and other things and hurt feelings. But entering in and we should try to understand what their experience is like for them and listen to their emotions. Entering in means inviting them to share with you what it's like for them to be them. And your aim is not to prove your point, it's to get to know them. I think a common mistake that we might make when we try to do this is we assume the speaker would feel the same feelings that we would feel if we were in their shoes. Meaning, if I'm asking, let's see, if what your job would be like as a, oh gosh, this is not, I should think of these examples ahead of time. I think I brought this up last week, but if my son had a bully at school, and if I asked him, well, what's going on? What's it like? Well, I can imagine that if I were in his shoes, it would be a very different experience if I was in his shoes versus him being in his shoes. He doesn't know what I know. He doesn't know that his friends at school who are bullies are really probably just scared, and just trying to impress or whatever. For my son, if that were to happen, his experience would be entirely different than my imagined experience if I were him. And the same thing goes, like if you're talking to your spouse or your coworker or whoever it might be, when we imagine what it would be like for us to be in their situation, we bring with us our temperament, our history, our strengths, our weaknesses. We bring our own frame of mind into their situation, and it changes the whole equation. So the goal here is to ask them what it's like for them to be them, and they're the only ones who are qualified to answer that question. Does that make sense? Okay, so the next thing is connect. Your goal is to connect. Let them know you've heard and understand what they shared. Okay, so I deal with a lot of couples. Lots of wives get frustrated at this point because they're talking to a husband who has no facial expressions, right? They're opening up and they're sharing a frustration. They're just, and there's strong feelings there, and then the man stonewalls. And sit there, like there's no, what's happening? He might be listening. He might be doing all the right things in his head. Like literally, he might be like really trying to, what's it like for her to be her? He might be doing that. But as far as she sees, there's no connection. There's no mirror of, in a sense. Like that's why girls are so good on the phone together. I mean, you can tell by the girl's pitch in their voice how the girl on the other end is on the phone. Their voice goes up, yeah, they're both excited. And same thing, they're really intuitively good at that connection. And when you are seeking to enter in, you want to, start to complete that transaction by joining them and letting them know, like, you hear them and you understand, like, and there's some sort of response. A common mistake, though, is once we start to enter into someone's world and listen to them, we often make the mistake of trying to then address the problem or fix the issue that they're sharing about, or rescue them and make them feel better. Um, a common Bible verse that gets thrown at people if they're grieving, for example, Romans 8:28. Hey, God works all things for the good of those who love God. And, I know you're upset, but God works all things for good. And what you just did is you just said, hey, you don't need to feel that way. Just take this pill and call me in the morning. Um, Yet Romans 8:28 is just as inspired as the other passages of the Bible. It's just that if you are in a hurry to fix it or to rescue them, you're not connecting with them. You're not joining them in their sadness. And that's the next point here, is care for them.
Hey,
Show
Ryan.
them. Oh yeah.
Sorry, I just you kind of answered this, but Christina asked, "Is the goal of entering in to understand?"
The goal, say, is the goal of caring to understand? I'm going to share my screen because thanks for, the question is the goal of caring to understand? Is that right? No, if I heard that right, because I was multitasking. The goal of entering in, I think, is to understand. The goal of connecting is to let them know that you are there. You're there trying to not just understand, but like you're listening and engaged. Caring here is the completion of the transaction, that like your pain is my pain. Your story has, what's going on with you has an impact on me. So you haven't effectively fixed anything or done. Hey, remember that clip last week? The Bing Bong is crying because he's being forgotten about, and then sadness comes, and Joy's like, "Hey, cheer up, sing a happy song," and Bing Bong's still crying, and then sadness comes and sits next to him and says, "They took your wagon," and that's sad, and it hurts, and all she does is she gets sad with him. She understands what he's going through, what he's thinking and feeling, and she gets sad with him, and suddenly he's better. She hasn't done anything other than get sad with him. And so, yes, simple answer to that question, entering in, the goal is understanding. Connecting, I'm with you, caring, you've impacted me. A common mistake at the caring level. Okay, this is really important. We tend to confuse the difference between entering in and caring. We tend to confuse that with agreement. That if you've had a hard day, and you're frustrated and discouraged because you weren't able to return your sweater, and the customer service person was really rude and all this stuff, and you think, well, you should have brought the receipt, and you were tempted to fix it, but instead you just like, oh man, stinks. Seriously, and you feel kind of like, that for this person, this must be really frustrating, and you're just caring about them, and you actually feel some frustration with them. It feels like you're agreeing with them that they are right, the customer service was wrong, etc. That makes sense? It often feels like caring is agreeing, and it's not necessarily agreement. It doesn't have, there's a time to communicate truth and address the issue, but it's about timing and sequence. And we often skip over this section to get straight down to let's address the issue. Amen on that from anybody? Okay. And we're a lot better at seeing where people don't do this well in our lives, but we often don't see where we don't do it well in the lives of others. Classic example, and I hope there's no there's generalities in saying it this way, but wives often see how husbands don't do it well, but then those same wives don't see how they don't do it well for their kids. Am I right on that? That often we like our kids do something and you're like, well, just obey the rules, or just, I told you how to match your clothes, and you come up with these things, and instead of just entering in and feeling with them that, yeah, that does stink. That's really, anyway. We don't naturally know how to do this kind of stuff. We usually, I've seen the illustration that we're like, two people are often like hardback book, hardcover books that are bumping into each other and wondering why we can't understand each other, and we're just crashing into each other. But this exercise is sort of like learning to like open each other up and like read and know each other at more of a heart level. And this is especially challenging because our strongest emotions usually push their way to the front of the line and they confuse everything. Like, anger is the most classic one. That it runs to the front of the line, it leads the charge on addressing the issue, and it goes bad because we don't think clearly when we're angry. We don't approach wisely. We make assumptions about the other person. We launch accusations. We attack. And then that leads to counter attacks and defensiveness. Anger is not supposed to be frontline connecting emotional material. And so for those reasons, it's helpful to have a script to kind of like do this emotional connection stuff, engaging others in emotions. So instead of letting strong emotions lead you, this is a proposed script that is taken straight from the book Untangling Emotions. It's a good book. So number one, this you start with vulnerability, like Robin Williams' character did. Start with vulnerability, which proposed statement here is, okay, this is what it was like for me. Let's say, a made up example, that there was a tense goodbye between me and Brandy before I left for work. If we got into like like a bit of an argument, and then I just leave, and maybe say, all right, bye, and I leave and I go to work and we're not talking. Let's say that's the scenario. To begin with vulnerability might sound like this. Hey, honey, this morning I was feeling stressed trying to leave for work by 8:30, and I wasn't, maybe I wasn't ready to hear what you were saying. I wanted to let you know that I was upset because I felt criticized, but I was angry and I didn't know what to say, so I just left in silence. That's not right. I'm sorry. I don't want there to be a wall between us. Can we talk about it? Okay, so that's made up, but that would be a good vulnerable approach. I mean, would be different than my default would be like, hey, this morning you seemed really annoyed. Okay, is that going to be a helpful way? That's more of an attack, right? Point out what was going on with you, or hey, I'm working my butt off here, so why can't you just cut me some slack? And those are often the ways, like anger, when it runs to the front of the line, it starts the conversation. It's just not going to go well. But this isn't easy because if emotions are meant to connect, it's only possible when we stop attacking long enough to open up to each other. And that's why vulnerability is really difficult. It feels much safer to let anger lead and blame each other. Anger wants to crush the problem while being blind to our own contribution and while being blind to compassion for someone else who feels like the enemy. The word vulnerability comes from two words. Vulnerable. The able means able, but vulnerable is I think that's the word woundable. It's wound and able. So you're when you're being vulnerable, you're able to be wounded. So a vulnerability approaches, and when you do, your spouse could say something like, if I took my example, it'd be possible for Brandy to say something like, well, if you weren't so childish, then we wouldn't have to start these days this way or something. But by being vulnerable, I'm taking a major step away from entering into the blame war. It takes two to keep the war going, but vulnerability is retreating from the battle in humility, putting the good of a restored relationship ahead of your own need to be right or whatever. So being the first to be vulnerable, that's the first step here. I would say though, this alone is incomplete. If I were to stop here, it would probably sound like, so honey, I want you to see my side and agree with me. That's it. If I were just to stop there, I want you to know I was in a hurry and I didn't want to be criticized, and I shouldn't have left in a, you know, silent like that, but that's it. No, that's why the next step is important, because you're inviting someone to know you, but then on its heels, you invite them to be known. And the word is like, what was it like for you? That's a proposal. I mean, what were you going through this morning? And the word there is empathy, what we've been talking about. Like, empathy is listening with eagerness to understand and to care. It's desire to feel with the other person. So it's what we were talking about in the entering in. Um, you know, and it's an expression of, hey, I want to know what this situation was like for you, not what your situation should have been like for you, or what it would have been like for me if I were in your shoes. So back to my made up scenario. These made up scenarios are really close to real. So, I mean, they might as well be real. But so, honey, can I ask what was this morning like for you? I mean, and then as I'm listening, I'm imagining what stresses Brandy had, what fears maybe she was wrestling with, what potential problems she might have been feeling when she criticized or said something like, truth is, there's been times where she would say something, hey, make sure you don't leave that on the counter. And I had every intention of going to grab it before I left. But what I'm not factoring in is I've got a history of leaving that on the counter. Uh, we so when you're empathizing, you're asking what was it like for you, and an empathetic person is then imagining what is it like for them. What would it be like to grow up with the expectations of being perfect, like this person might, or to spend all day battling levels of insecurity or uncertainty, or having to deal with difficult coworkers or kids. Um, so I heard someone say if you could bottle and sell empathy, you'd put divorce lawyers out of business. Because empathy is like you are actually feeling what that other person experiences, and you connect. So here, I'll give a different example. Let's say let's say you have a coworker, and he's clearly discouraged because he's 32 and he's still single. And you know that he's got nothing to worry about. I mean, the guy's like, he's young, he's healthy, he's like handsome guy, and you know plenty of women who would love to date him. Okay, but he's eaten up with sadness and self-pity. What would it look like to empathize with him? You know what most people would say? Oh, you got nothing to worry about. You're young. You know, like that's called rescuing. Oh, you gotta try this.com dating site. You know, you gotta go to my church and meet some. It's called fixing. Instead, to empathize means to wonder what it's like for him to be him, given his history that you don't necessarily know, given his fears that you can kind of probably guess, but you don't necessarily know, given his temperament, his confidence, or his relative lack of confidence. He is not you. You're not him. And so empathy is seeking to know him in his experience. So vulnerability with a goal then to empathize and to feel what they're experiencing then. And so this whole process so far is being fueled by a holy curiosity that wants to know and to care about another person's experience. And the next step in this then is what's called the summary. So after they've shared what was going on for them, you say something like, so this is what it was like for you. And you summarize graciously. And that's why the word is charity here, that you enter in and you try to say what they would say if they summarized it. So a common mistake is you know, you could erect a straw man and summarize what they said to make your point. So what you're saying is you're such a baby that you can't handle a little critique, you know, or to summarize in a way that gets a little jab in, but instead you're trying to summarize in a way that restates what you heard in the most genuine and accurate way possible. And this step significantly de-escalates tension because the other person feels heard. You're listening and they feel heard. It grants the other person the dignity that they deserve to be heard. And it's very difficult when the person's words are indicting you. The very thing they're sharing is saying that you're the bad guy. So that takes a level, that's varsity maturity, to still genuinely listen, imagine what they feel, and understanding, yes, I feel like the enemy to this person right now, but what are they going through? What fears, all this other stuff? And you're asking God, maybe even prayerfully say, God, will you give me understanding here? And as you're listening, anger is being pushed to the back of the line, it's still there, but your summary, remember, it's not an endorsement. Your summary is not an agreement to what they're saying. It doesn't need to include an evaluation, though. You're just trying to understand what they've said so that they are heard. There's a great book, side note, Tim Keller, the book called Reason for God. And what he does is he takes 7 reasons people don't believe in Christianity, and instead of arguing into their reasons, he takes their doubts and goes farther with them. So someone says, I can't believe that Christianity is true because there can't just be one way to heaven. He spends the first part of that saying, yeah, how can there just be one way to heaven when there's this many different religions in the world and Christians only make up this part of it? And then to think that God would be so, and he takes their argument farther. What does that do for a person who's listening? Like if I was a non-Christian and I gave my argument and you said, yeah, how could that be true? How could the Bible be true and it's been translated this many times? You're not going to go, yeah, see, I'm right. No, you're going to say, wow, you've heard my argument and you might even know my argument better than I do. Okay, well, if you don't agree with that, then it's your turn, right? And so in the same way, when you're listening and you're empathizing and then you're summarizing graciously, you're earning the right to be heard. But here's what's amazing about this script. The next step isn't my turn. It's, okay, so I summarized and then I say, so am I hearing you right? This is humility and patience. This is 3 times that you're giving them the opportunity to speak, to share. So without this step, it might feel like, okay, so I get you, now it's my turn. But this is, you're humbly saying, hey, I might have missed something. Is there more that is there something that I left out? So this is, I saying, I care more about what's going on with you than winning this fight. Or it can make the difference between suspicious disconnection and building a trusting relationship. So when one person feels understood and cared for like this, it makes them much more willing to let their defenses down and hear yours. Moving on to the next step. How can we do this differently? Like, what could we change? And this is called courage because we're going to turn and address what's going on now. There's been, and you may or may not get the opportunity to share your side, but I think this, so I mean, you could carefully maybe place that in here, but I like this next step is God's presence and his promise to help give you good reason to believe that like you can understand and care about this person. It brings this hope that the 2 of you can actually work toward a solution here. So it takes courage to seek the Lord and to address how things can be different in the future. How can we do this differently? And then the last step here is a possibly, this must change though, but this can't keep happening. And that's where anger is still there. Anger wants to destroy the problem. And when anger is reckless, it destroys the person. But when anger is slow, it slows you down to address the issue, the problem, the sin, and that's why God is so good to us, because he's angry at our sin, but he doesn't destroy us. He surgically cuts out our sin, by revealing our sin to us gently and punishing it in his son, and then slowly allowing us to experience the consequences. This is the type of anger that it's not good to never be angry. It's just that it's not smart to lead with it. So with all of these things, I haven't mentioned that, let me stop the share there. I haven't mentioned anything about nonverbal communication. I would say throughout this whole script, nonverbal communication is key. Because how things are said are probably more important than actually what is said. If your tone and your face don't line up, the other person is going to believe your tone and your face, right? Like if what you're saying doesn't line up with your face, they believe your face. Um, I have to be conscious not to fold my arms when I'm listening, and if I'm angry. Um, Words can be clarified, but faces and gestures and tone really can't. They don't lie. So you are responsible for your nonverbals. So if others say you sound angry, it's not helpful to be defensive and go back and forth. Most of us are unaware of our nonverbal communication. Um, Apologize and double down on your own attitude or affect, and try to double down on it with intentionality. Like watch out for eye rolling or heavy sighing or folded arms. Try to keep an open heart and an open posture. Leading with vulnerability and connecting this way, it's just seeking to follow and model what Christ has done for us. You know, he's everything. Every step that we've gone through is a good picture of how Christ is incarnated and come to us, and opened himself up to us. I'm out of time. It's definitely a mouthful.
Ryan, there was a question,
Yes.
and Christina might have answered it, but what was the name of the book you just referenced about 7
Yeah.
reasons?
The Reason for God, by Tim Keller. So Christina did answer it correctly. It's one of his first books. It's great. I'm a Tim Keller fan, though. You probably picked up on it because I think every third quote of mine is his. Good question. Great book. Any other questions? Hey, one question that I would ask is, do I use this script literally? Do I pull it out, and like read from the script? My answer to that would be, if you're humble enough to pull out a script to keep you in bounds, you're basically, you could say, hey, I do a really bad job at this and I need help. So I'm going to try to keep myself, I love you and I want to do this well. So, but I mean, I can't think clearly through all this. So would you mind if I try to get help while I listen to you? Okay, since I see more women on my screen right now, on my gallery view, for the women that I do see, would you appreciate if your husband did that? Or would you think, why aren't you good at this yet? No, you'd appreciate it, right? Because that's humility. It's sure, maybe you should know this by now, but hey, I don't either. I don't do a good job of doing this stuff naturally. I get frustrated and I turn into a dumb caveman. That's my default. I become dumb caveman. And then I think I'm so right in the moment. And then I look back and I'm like, what in the world was I thinking? That was so off. Anyway, so I would pull that out. If you're able to remember that in the midst of a tense situation, you're a bigger person. But that's my opinion. If anybody feels differently. Anybody else? Okay, what I'll do is I'll stop the recording, and then I'll hang around again. Father, thank you for our time together. Thank you for all the things you're teaching us. Again, I ask that would you help us to apply it in faith, really relying on you. And then would our relationships be blessed as a result? I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.